Hello and welcome again. Thank you for inviting me into your day, into your home, and wherever you are. Change. Let's talk about change. What causes people to change? Have you ever pondered on this? We all make decisions, big and small ones, but what causes you to make those bigger decisions, those big shifts? What causes you to make those changes? And there are many reasons for that, and they include things like life experience, or advice from a friend, or maybe out of hardship. It's out of necessity. It's maybe logical deduction, or maybe you've had some insight. So when we talk about change as a Christian, our change is about transformation. It's about becoming the best versions of ourselves. You've heard that before, but what does this mean? What does being the best version of ourselves mean? Well, it's more than being yourself. We've all heard that advice. Just be yourself. And I get it. It's about being honest. Be true. Don't pretend. Just be real and let people see who you are. However, there are times when being yourself is not the best advice at all, because if being yourself means you never need to change and that's all you are, then there's no room for growth and for personal change. Can it be a good thing if being yourself means that I never need to grow? Is it okay if it means that I'm selfish, I'm rude? Is it okay if being me means I'm just arrogant? I don't think so. This is not a good thing. So a better way to grow is to say, I want to become the best version of myself. And that means you're constantly growing and developing. You're evolving to become a better form. And we want to change and evolve so that we reflect Jesus. We want to be the version that reflects the beauty and the love of Jesus. And as you grow in faith, you're becoming more and more like Jesus. The best version is when you're perfected into Christ. So as we look into our story today in Mark 1, here's my main idea. Change. Deep internal change happens when we experience the life-changing presence of Jesus' authority in our lives. Deep internal change happens when we experience the life-changing presence of Jesus' authority in our lives. And we come to today's passage and we find Jesus, he's just starting out. He's put together his team, and now he's off to fulfill God's calling in his life. It means that he's to preach to the poor, to heal the brokenhearted, and to free the captives. So we find him here at the local synagogue, and he has just wowed the crowds. He impressed them. They like what they saw and heard. Verse 21, Jesus entered the synagogue and taught. They were astounded at his teaching, for he taught them as one having authority, not as the scribes. So a solid start for him. Now, I've always wondered what it would be like if I lived in the time of Jesus. I wished I could have been there to listen to him, to see and hear what he was like as a preacher. And I wondered what made him so attractive. What kind of speaker was he? What made him so engaging? Have you ever wondered that? What was his voice like? Did he have this thundering baritone voice that projected? Or was he more soft-spoken? And what about his style? There's so many different styles of speakers and preachers. What was Jesus' style? Was he fast-paced and dynamic? Or was he more slow and methodical? See, we have his recorded words, but we have no idea all the other aspects of communication. And what about his body language? Did he pace around and walk around with lots of arm gestures? Or did he kind of just stay in one place? What about his tonality and the pace of his speaking? Was he flat, or did he vary his voice? You know, Jesus' teaching was a monologue, like I'm doing right now. I'm giving a monologue. I'm the only person talking. And these days, a monologue, a speech, I don't think it's the most engaging way of communicating, unless of course you're a YouTuber. Well, you're watching me on YouTube now, but I don't really consider myself a YouTuber. I just happen to be a pastor who posts on YouTube. But if that makes me a YouTuber, then so be it. And we all have our favorite YouTubers. Usually they're people that are very entertaining and very engaging, and they could be influencers, they could be experts, or they could be authorities in their area. And I think about these ultra famous gaming YouTubers, especially the ones that my kids are engrossed with. Millions of views, hundreds of thousands of subs. So I had to see for myself what made them so popular and engaging. And after watching a few of them, I could see the attraction. They are engaging as they talk about their walkthroughs. They're funny, they're enthusiastic, they're silly, sometimes crude, but overall they're entertaining. So back to Jesus. He started to command a following. So I'm curious as to what this means. He taught them as one having authority and not as the scribes. So this teaching with authority, the crowds felt that there was something about his presence, something special. He carried a certain power when he spoke. I think we all know what this is like. We all have heard speeches and sermons and presentations where the speaker just captivated your attention. They inspired you with their sense of presence and authority. And throughout human history, the human voice has been a powerful tool for change. There have been many great orators who gave great speeches that changed the course of history in a lasting way. And there are lists of these people. Let me just share with you a few of these famous speeches. First one, Eleanor Roosevelt.
I'm very glad to be able to take part in this celebration in St. Louis on Human Rights Day. Ever since the Declaration of Human Rights, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, was passed in Paris in 1948 on December the 10th, we have fostered the observance of this day not only in the United States, but throughout the world. The object is to make people everywhere conscious of the importance of human rights and freedoms. The reason for that is that these are spoken of and emphasized in the Charter of the United Nations, and the Declaration was written to elaborate the rights already mentioned in the Charter, and to emphasize also for all of us the fact that the building of human rights would be one of the foundation stones on which we would build in the world an atmosphere in which peace could grow.
So this was her address at the UN, at the United Nations, on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Okay, we have an airplane. Now, she has been described as a shy woman, but she was a very dedicated humanitarian and activist. And at the United Nations, she gave the greatest speech, her greatest speech, when she presented this, the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. And in this speech, she urged the Assembly to adopt this document. And after her speech, the next day, it was signed, unanimously accepted. And this Universal Declaration of Human Rights has influenced human rights agreements throughout the world in all different countries. And it is the most translated document in the world. Over 370 different types of dialects have been translated. How about this next one? Nelson Mandela.
Africans want to be paid a living wage. Africans want to perform work which they are capable of doing, and not work which the government declares them to be capable of. We want to be allowed to live where we obtain work, and not be endorsed out of an area because we were not born there. We want to be allowed and not to be obliged to live in rented houses which we can never call our own. We want to be part of the general population and not confined to living in our ghettos. African men want to have their wives and children to live with them where they work and not to be forced into an unnatural existence in men's hostels. Our women want to be with their men folk and not to be left permanently widowed in the reserves. We want to be allowed out after 11 o'clock at night and not to be confined to our rooms like little children. We want to be allowed to travel in our own country and to seek work where we want to, and not where the Labor Bureau tells us to. We want a just share in the whole of South Africa. We want security and a stake in society. Above all, my Lord, we want equal political rights.
So Nelson Mandela, this was his speech at the Rivonia trial, at his own personal trial. So Nelson Mandela, he had spoken very courageously against the injustices of apartheid in South Africa. And apartheid was cruel. It enforced racial segregation. For example, it blocked what black people could do, who they could marry, what jobs they could take, and where they can go in the city. But Mandela was outspoken. He was so outspoken, he was arrested and he was given life imprisonment. So in his own trial in 1964, Mandela stood before the court, and instead of testifying to protect himself or to claim his innocence, he gave this speech which defined him as a leader. The speech didn't save him from being convicted. He ended up stirring the hearts and he fired up the people, but he still ended up staying 27 years in prison for his beliefs. But his words were brave and they were courageous, and they were key in dismantling apartheid in this country. And he eventually was released from the country in 1990, and he won the Nobel Prize for Peace 3 years later. The next one is probably the most familiar to you, this speech, the speech of Martin Luther King Jr., I Have a Dream.
Even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream.
Yeah.
It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream.
So Martin Luther King Jr., this speech, I Have a Dream, is probably one of the most recognized and most famous speeches in American history. Martin Luther King was a Baptist minister, and as a minister, he fought bravely for social change to bring rights to Black Americans. And he was a gifted preacher. He used his voice to teach people about the importance of equality and acceptance. And this speech, I Have a Dream, it was preached to 250,000 people live. So all these leaders, they stood out as giants. They gave powerful landmark speeches that changed the course of history for the good. And each of these speakers were very different in their content, in their delivery, in their pace, in their style, but they all moved people and they influenced them with authority. So authority. They all possess some sort of authority that caused the masses to accept them and to bring change. So what do you think authority means in a leader? There are all kinds of authority. Think about the different kinds of authority. There is the authority that comes with a position, like a judge or a police officer. There is a coercive authority, authority that's oppressive. And then there's a charismatic authority that comes with the nature and the personality of that person. So back to Jesus. After he wowed the people, they said of him, "For he taught them as one having authority." So I'm curious, what was it about in his day that made people notice him? Was it his presence? Was it his position? It says he was very different than the scribes. He could have been very charismatic, but it was probably more than charisma. I'm sure his ideas were fresh. He loved to challenge the status quo and the traditional way of thinking. And I'm not sure if it was just his vocabulary. I'm not sure if he was just a better orator than others. I think what made Jesus stand apart was his spiritual authority. It was both his spiritual presence of word and deed that made people notice him, and he stood out. And people who were open to spiritual things, they were touched. They were able to see and know and be able to change. So Jesus wasn't just a rabbi. He wasn't just an engaging speaker. Like, I'm sure if Jesus was on TED Talks, he would have killed it. But Jesus was more than just a polished presenter. Yes, he used human words, he used human vocabulary, but he spoke with power and conviction that comes with God. Jesus, after all, was God in the flesh. He had an intimate knowledge of God the Father. So his words, they landed on human ears, but they took root where people lived. They took root right here in our hearts. And it inspired curiosity, new possibilities, and new hope for change. And I think this is how they experienced his authority. I don't know exactly what he preached about, but I do know Jesus would have talked about God's good intention for the world. He probably talked about how God was changing the old ways to usher in new meaning. And I'm sure he talked about God's work of liberation and freedom from afflictions, which included sickness and addictions and dark powers. We all I experience Jesus' authority. You experience his authority in your life, and this primarily happens when we connect with his words. When you hear it preached, when you study it, when you meditate on it, when you talk about it, somehow these words connect with our spirit and they change us. We sense his authority and we shift and change and become better versions and the best version of ourselves. So the service was over. Jesus was leaving and the people were still gawking, still talking about him, when suddenly this crazy man jumps out of nowhere. "What do you want with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to wipe us out already? I know who you are. You are the Holy One of God." So this is a very unsettling situation. We have a man who is possessed by an unclean spirit or an evil spirit, and his entire being was overtaken. We aren't told what happened and how it happened, but the voice that speaks is not from the man. So what do we make of this demon possession as modern people? Aside from Hollywood entertainment, how does this story fit with our experience and our understanding? Well, to the medical and to the scientific world, this is out of category. If it's not contained in a DSM-5, the Diagnosis for Statistical Manual of Mental Disorder, 5th edition, then it cannot be taken seriously. Because modern people, we have science and medicine and we figured out everything, right? No, not really. We are dealing with the unseen realm, and spirits don't fit neatly into our scientific categories. In my reading, I came across this very interesting research paper, and it's from the Journal of Trauma and Dissociation, and the title is this: "Can the DSM-5 differentiate between non-pathological possession and dissociative identity disorder?" So here we have scientists questioning their own methodology, the way they diagnose and categorize. So let me read a bit of this abstract. In the first stage, childhood and early childhood, she displayed intrusive thoughts and lack of control over possessive states, which were associated with heightened states of anxiety, loneliness, amnesia, and family contact. In stage 2, late 20s up to the present, she regularly experienced possession states, but felt in control of their onset and found them religiously meaningful. We question the accuracy of diagnosing this individual with dissociative identity disorder in her early life, and suggests that the DSM-5 criteria fail to address the ambiguity of affect surrounding possession experiences, positive at the individual level, negative at the impersonal level, and a lack of clear knowledge of the prevalence of possession and other unusual experience in general populations. Okay, that's a mouthful, but it's fascinating that this paper basically concludes that there are human conditions, human experiences that are out of category. They can't be explained by medical texts. And this is exactly what we have here recorded in the Gospel of Mark. A man has a condition that is non-medical. He's been overtaken by an unclean spirit. So let's take a closer look at this. First of all, the encounter. Look at who initiates this meeting. It wasn't Jesus. It was initiated by the man, the evil spirit in the man, who came to Jesus. Jesus did not go out to him looking for someone to exorcise. And look what he says. What have we to do with this, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? Fascinating. So the second thing that I notice here is that there is an acknowledgement. They know each other. They even call him by name, Jesus of Nazareth. So where did they first meet? Well, it's not because they shop at the same farmer's market. They've known each other since the beginning of time. Satan's realm has been plotting, rebelling and combating against God since even before the fall. So these are long-time foes, but there's a big difference. They're not equals, not by a far margin. And we see this in this comment. What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? Basically, they're saying, why are you picking this fight now? Could you not have left things the way they were between us? Well, no. Jesus just couldn't leave this man to be tormented. And the unclean spirits recognize their pending doom. They know how this is going to end up, and it's not good for them. Jesus rebuked him, saying, "Be silent and come out of him." The unclean spirit, convulsing him and crying with a loud voice, came out of him. So the man was free. He was released from his terrible torment, and he's back to his normal self. Jesus had rescued and delivered him. And this is a miracle. Jesus demonstrated his authority. First in the synagogue, he spoke with authority. And here now on the street, he demonstrated his authority over the dark forces of evil. And this is just a foreshadow of what he will do. He will conquer over all sin and death. And now look at the response of the crowd. They were amazed, and they kept asking one another, "What is this? A new teaching with authority. He commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him." At once, his fame began to spread throughout the surrounding region of Galilee. So all were amazed. Not a single person was left unimpressed. And Jesus' teaching was revolutionary. And now even more impressive is what they saw, his power and authority over the demons. What a way to start off ministry. And notice what happens. They say his fame spread throughout Galilee. Jesus was getting famous. Fame. Jesus didn't do any of this to become famous or to get likes or subs. No. In fact, he rejected this whole category of fame. Our world, we look for famous people to follow, but Jesus didn't come to be famous. Yes, he came to call people to follow him so that we can usher in the kingdom and change the world. He came to bring hope and real change, life-giving change, a change that comes through love and forgiveness. And Jesus didn't come to assert his authority over us. No, he came as what? A servant, a humble servant. He came to look for disciples, men and women who hear and experience his authority over sin and death. And he looks for men and women who are willing to let go and say, yes, I will follow you. And because you have heard his call, I have heard his call, then he is doing his life-changing work in your life. Little by little, day by day, he's changing you, transforming you, and you are becoming a better version of yourself each and every day. So may you allow him to continue to do his good work through these hard days. May you reflect on, so that you may reflect a more beautiful version of Jesus each day. And may you all grow deeper in faith, hope, and love. Blessings to you. Amen.